Okay, are we live? Cool, cool. It's always nice to ask if we are live before I'm starting to say all my brilliant and clever insights on life and yoga. Welcome to this 45-minute-ish flex class at Yogaground. Today we are in Fairhaven and blocking the sun out with big blinders going down over the windows. I am Camilla and I am happy that you have tuned in for this class. Today we will focus a bit on hip flexors. You might not love that when we do it, but hopefully it will feel good afterwards. So, as I wrote on Instagram before, two blocks, bricks, or similar. I know that everyone might not have this at home. It's not going to be a game changer unless if you don't have them. If you have something to use instead, be creative. Otherwise, we'll make do with what we have as well. Okay, let's do this. So the first pose we're going to do is one of my favorite poses. It's Bananasana. And yes, that is actually the name. So we're going to be down on the back, and my lovely cameraman will soon zone in or zoom in to kind of show you a bit the shape on the body. But let's get into it, and then we'll see how it feels and how it works. As always, everything looks different in our different bodies, so there's no right or wrong, really. Okay. So when you're down on your back, one way to do it is to have the knees bent and to move the feet over on towards one side. And then straighten the legs. That way you should begin to feel stretch already on the outside. In this case, I walked my feet over towards the left side of my mat, and therefore the stretch is on the outside of the right leg. Without moving the buttocks, moving the head and the shoulders also towards the left on the mat. And last but not least, if it feels okay to draw the arm or arms above head, make that happen. Once you've maneuvered yourself into the pose, once you wiggled yourself into the pose, allow stillness to kind of set into your pose, into your practice. Stillness and softness. If it feels okay to close the eyes, close the eyes. And with the eyes closed, maybe beginning to close the lips as well to guide the breath in through the nose and out through the nose. In the beginning of the flex practice, it's always a good reminder that we're looking for the yin experience. Sorry for that. I might actually take a little sip of water. So, the yin experience, meaning that we're not looking for sensational, powerful, overwhelming. We're looking for subtle. You have about 1 more minute in the pose. So look for that gentle sensation along the right side of your body. If you, like me, began to move your limbs over towards the left side of your mat. Whenever you have those needs, those desires, to kind of just exhale out through the mouth, to release some tension. Allow that to happen. It's always in these first one or two poses where we begin to also prepare mentally ourselves for the practice. These shifts from the activeness into the passive part of the practice. Sometimes mentally, it takes a bit of time before we get the hang of it, before we get out of the doing to come into the being. Begin to make your way out of the pose, to kind of find neutral on the mat. And from neutral, we're moving over towards the other side. Feet moving towards the other side. The legs straighten. And then without moving the hips or buttocks, allowing the upper body to move. Upper body, shoulders and head towards that same direction where your legs were moving. So you're creating this side stretch on the other side. So begin to invite the softness of the yin into your practice. Stepping out of the doing and simply positioning or position your body into these poses, into these shapes. I've been thinking about priorities quite a lot lately. How we are prioritizing what we do, how we choose our priorities, what is important enough to become a priority, and how we learn to perhaps prioritize ourselves a bit higher, a bit better. Making it a priority, as a lot of you have been doing during this lockdown, to step on your mat once or maybe even twice a day or a few times per week. Making it a priority to take that time for yourself. But priorities are sometimes tricky. I know for myself, I'm pretty clear on, at least on paper, what my top priorities are. I have my 3 top priorities clear. And if you haven't your priorities clear for yourself, maybe that's another good little exercise for yourself to be doing this evening or maybe a bit later this week. What are your 3 top priorities for your life, for your life? And so I'm kind of clear on mine. But I noticed that how I spent my time and how I spent my energy lately was not really in line with those priorities. And it took a bit of time before I could begin to shift. Actually, it was a note that I had given to a student from or during a workshop that came back to me. One of my favorite quotes. I have so many favorite quotes though. But it says, be the priority of your own life. Bananasana. Nice side bend. Come slowly out of your pose. And just come into that rebound, that stillness, where you kind of pay attention to how your spine especially feel, or maybe also on the outside of your thighs, outside of your hips. In the rebound, sometimes we can feel quite a lot of sensation. And then, however it feels like a good idea for you to come to seated, make your way to seated. So the next pose, half butterfly pose. Just checking my hair. Bend one leg. Place the foot towards the inside of your leg. And then draw the chin down towards the chest. Maybe I should have this one a bit closer. Chin down towards the chest. Rounding your upper body forward. And here the goal is not to place your forehead on your leg, but rather the goal is to begin to feel sensation in the backside of your straight leg. And for me, I do that quite quickly. And this is my first stop. Turning the palms up towards the ceiling rather than down on the mat. Also just to kind of invite this feeling of surrender. Where it's not a question about pushing or pulling myself further down, but surrender. This might be my shape, or maybe a bit more. Be the priority of your own life. Powerful words, but as always with words, if we don't put any meaning behind them, they are just words. Nothing is going to change unless you start putting some meaning into those words. So when I read that quote, be the priority of your own life, I did that little check with myself and realized I wasn't doing that particularly well with my own priorities. You have a bit more than 1 minute left in the hold. Maybe you, like me, begin to feel how gravity just slowly but surely invites you a bit deeper. If that feels good to just allow that to happen, allow it. If it feels like it's beginning a bit too much, then you can always place the hands onto the floor to just gently kind of create some resistance, kind of this little support. where your hands, your arms carry a bit of the weight. The leg is relaxed. The lower back is relaxed. Take 3 more rounds of breath. Once those are completed, bring yourself back up into seated. I'm using my hands to kind of push myself up. And then in this pose, we're kind of heading straight into the second side as the rebound can happen for the leg that we just worked on as it becomes kind of inactive. So the other leg straightens and you repeat all over again that notion of just pulling the chin towards the chest and allowing yourself to lean forward to where you begin to feel it on the backside of that straight leg. For me, that begins to happen quite quickly. And so therefore, this is where I stay. This is where I choose to stop. Not pushing further. It would be possible, but it would be with more force, would be with muscle strength rather than with the strength of the yin approach. Priorities. I listened to a podcast, it's a few years ago now, where this speaker, he was talking about the power of priorities. And how for him, he had it very clear, his top 3 priorities. And how they kind of acted as a guide for him throughout his practice, or throughout his life, throughout his career and job. Now that we have a bit of time extra on our hands, maybe that can be a little focus, a little mental exercise. Are you clear on your 3 priorities? For me, my top priority is my health. If I don't have my health, then there's a lot of things that are way less important. And if I do things where I feel that my health is beginning to be in question, then that's also an indication to clearly just kind of do that check with the priorities. How am I spending my time? What am I doing towards myself? Last 3 breaths. And when they are completed, use your hands to push into the floor to push yourself up. And maybe lean back to straighten the legs and just enjoy the rebound. Maybe you feel a lot of sensations as you sit in stillness. Maybe you feel quite some on the backside of both legs or just one leg. Maybe you feel stuff in your lower back. The next pose we are going to do is a twist. And this one might be helpful with the blocks or maybe not. So the way I'm setting this pose up is that I'm kind of leaning or facing the long side of my mat. And I will begin with my left leg as my front leg. So my left leg becomes kind of parallel almost to the long edge of the mat. My right knee kind of comes down towards the sole of my foot. And then the right knee is also bent. So this is kind of my starting position. And then for the one who have already observed it, I place the blocks at the top of my mat. So here is where the rotation of my upper body begins. Left buttock is most likely, for most of us, leaving the floor. So it's not in contact with the floor, but the front leg is. Creating this rotation of the upper body so that my upper body begins to be facing the front part of my mat. My shoulders are not quite parallel to each other, and that's really not the point, but I'm beginning to feel it properly into the lower back, especially here on the right side of my lower back. So this one is kind of coming into compression a bit. And the left side of my lower back is really like getting a good stretch. Here you can choose. You stay in this upright position. I have my hands up on my blocks, but most of you know it. I'm also quite lazy. So often it's nice to not be up onto the hands, but come down on the forearms. And it's like the belly button is kind of trying a bit to move also a bit more towards the mat. Might not happen, but just saying. Again, we're kind of stacking the body into this position and then doing the best we can to soften into it. For some of you, maybe you can lower down deeper onto the mat. As always, it's not a goal to come down towards the mat. It's more just listening if the body is telling you that it's okay. I often talk about this, that we want to have a constant sensation in the pose from the beginning to the end of the hold. It's not that we are looking for 100% in the beginning of the hold and 0% at the end. It's more a 60-70% throughout the full duration of the hold. Maybe the more you kind of lower your upper body down towards the floor, the more you begin to feel that your belly is kind of being a bit compressed. And that's perfectly fine. If it's feeling really uncomfortable, or if you just had a big meal before you tuned into class, I'm sorry, maybe not the best pose to do. With your next inhale, though, see if you can deepen and soften a tiny bit. And then begin to, with the use of your hands, coming out of the pose. Second side. Might be good to actually have the blocks with me as well. So all of this. So for the second side, the lineup is the same. Right leg for me, kind of parallel to the long edge. And then the left knee comes towards the sole of the foot. It is so easy when we begin to move into the twist that we think that it's going to be exactly the same on this side. But most likely it isn't. We're holding tension quite different between the two sides of the body. Sometimes we can more quickly lower down to a deeper variation, deeper place in the pose. And sometimes we're kind of not lowering down as much as we managed on the first side. As always, it's not about this comparison. But rather seeing what the body tells you that you can do. So as you stay in the twist on the second side, allow the priority to be connected to your breath. How can you soften your belly to invite the breath down into your belly? And even if when you lower down deeper into the pose, and even as the belly become more compressed, still make it a priority to have your breath being part of the pose. Twists are one of the more beneficial poses that we can do for the health of our spine. The health of our spine. And if one is to believe the founder of Pilates, I think it is, that we are only as old as our spines. Meaning if we have a healthy, a young spine, that is kind of our actual age, not necessarily biological age. But also meaning that if we are 27 and our spine is as stiff as if we were 90, then that's more our actual age. If we want to have a vital and healthy, strong body, taking good care of our spine is a really good way to, at least in parts, get there. I'm not saying it's the only bit, but a strong and vital and flexible spine is an important part. Coming out of your pose and coming to simply sit in stillness. It's so easy, I feel it even for me, to begin to create some movement, to ignore those sensations that are happening in the spine that we are trying to pay attention to. So often we want to just kind of create that little moment of stillness when we come out of the pose. And you can create a bit of movement. Did I say create movement directly? Anyways, I meant create that rebound, the stillness when we come out of the pose. But speaking movement, it is time to move into this strong, good hip flexor pose of dragon. And in this pose, I recommend the 2 blocks on the high edge. It doesn't matter which foot you begin to step forward with, as we will be doing both. But 1 foot steps forward in between, I would say, the hands in between the blocks. But a reminder, in dragon pose, it's always the back leg, which is the focus. So the space between the thigh and the hip flexor, or rather the space between the thigh and the hip, that's where the hip flexor is. That's where we target this pose. If your back knee is not enjoying it, find a way to pad underneath the knee. It can be folding the mat double underneath. We are staying for a few more rounds of breath in this first variation of the pose. Take 2 more rounds of breath. In dragon, it's even more important to remember to breathe. Once those 2 rounds of breath are completed, I invite you to move the blocks to the inside of that front foot and wiggle the front foot further out to the side. And then lower your forearms down on the blocks. This way you can also allow the front knee to move a bit further out to the side. You're kind of coming into a lower variation. So here I am still up on the high edge on the blocks. If you have blocks, maybe you want to go lower. If you have no blocks and still want to do this pose and kind of come into a lower variation, then you could begin to move your arms, your hands forward. This would also create sort of same in terms of how you can lower for your hips down onto the floor. Remember the breath. We have about 1 lovely last minute in this second variation of dragon. Allow your front foot to wiggle to whatever is needed to not have painful compression in that space between the thigh and the hip on the front leg. It quite often gets to be painful compression if we're unlucky, and then it's nice to know that just by moving the foot a bit further out to the side or how you angle the foot, that can be avoided. What is not something to avoid is that we are heading towards a resting pose after dragon. So slowly, it's like you kind of feel like you're 3 times your age coming out, especially of this pose, or maybe it's just me. Sit yourself back into child's pose. I often think that's a nice counter pose for or after a dragon. Or not a counter pose, but a way to completely relax the hip flexor. So always spend a few minutes lengthening the hip flexor and really actively pulling on it, which you might have felt. And in child's pose, as we bend the hip by pulling the knees in towards the chest, the muscle completely softens. Maybe it feels nice in your child's pose to just create a tiny bit of movement from side to side. But let's not put off the inevitable of dragon on the second side. Blocks on the high edge. And step the other foot forward. As you do, find what feels like an okay position to begin your first variation, your first hold of dragon. That target area is just above where the thigh becomes the hip. If it becomes too much too quickly, then simply allow yourself to back out of the pose a bit. As always, you can rest hands up on blocks. Should you not have blocks or similar available, you can always rest your forearms on your front thigh. Or you can, if this one feels nice for you, place your hands and rest it. But I feel it hard for me to relax in that. Forearms works. My personal favorite, though, is one hand on the block and one on the thigh. For good or bad, we are getting towards the possibility of taking a different variation of dragon. If you do that, place the hands, the blocks on the inside of the foot. Allow the foot to move further out to the side. And allow yourself to lower down into your slightly lower dragon. Same thing here though. If it becomes too much, you can always soften. Way to know if your body is thinking that it is too much is to focus on your buttocks a bit. No need to zoom in on my buttocks though, just saying. But focus on your buttocks and check, are you clenching, clinging, tightening your buttocks? Or are they soft? Soft is what we want. Hard and like firm is when the body thinks that this pose is a bit too much. So see if you can soften in that area. Make it a priority, since we're talking about priorities today. So I started to shift a bit in my priorities these last 2-3 weeks, as I felt that my first couple of weeks in this lockdown was all about work. Felt that I was working more, even though on one hand, obviously, I was working less. I am happy that time flies. For dragon. Oh. This, my dear students, is why I prefer to be the teacher, to hold you long in the pose, and so I don't have to stay in the pose. All jokes aside. Dragon is a good pose, but it is not always enjoyable while we are in it or in that transition coming out of it. But the hip flexors in your body, the hip flexors in my body are like internally doing a little victory dance right now and saying, yes, kind of. But time indeed flies. Let's come down on towards the back. We'll do a slightly shorter twist. But I want to do a supine twist as well because I think it's just awesome. So come down on your back. Knees bent, feet onto the floor. I like to support my knees on a block, which I think most of you know. Just simply dropping the knees to one side. I chose to drop them towards the left to begin with and to draw my right arm kind of in the opposite direction of the knees. As always, allow yourself to adjust, modify your pose a bit, kind of wiggle to come into your variation of it. We're looking for sensations, but not sensational. Be the priority of your own life. It is just like when we are on the airplanes. Well, in normal life, when we might be on the airplane, when they're whatever they are called in English, the flight attendances, the flight stewardess. You get what I mean? The lovely people who make sure that we are safe and behave and so on the plane while we're in there. Anyway, during the safety demonstration, they say that in the case of oxygen, if the pressure of oxygen drops, then these masks will come down. And that we are supposed to put our own mask on before attempting to aid anyone else. Come slowly out of the pose and transition yourself into the twist on the second side. Move the block over towards that side. Drop the knees. And dropping the knees towards the right. For me, it feels like a nice option to then draw my left arm kind of in the complete opposite direction. Nice placement for the other hand is actually on the belly. It's a little reminder to breathe into the belly. Just like they would say on the flight, on the plane, that if we have those oxygen masks on, that we should continue to breathe normal. We are to put our own mask on before aiding to help anyone else. Because let's face it, what good are you to anyone if you collapse? May it be because of not in play more, perhaps likely at home, because you've been working like crazy and there's no energy left for you to spend with your family. Or to spend on yourself. to be your own priority, to care for yourself. I often think about the battery indicator on our phones. You would very seldom risk running out of battery on your phone. As soon as you get anywhere near the red meter on the battery, you quickly plug it to recharge your phone. How awesome would it not be if we had that in our own system? It's like, whoa, energy, running low, recharge, refill, time for me. Ignore everyone else. Prioritize yourself. That would be good. Coming out of your twist and finding your Shavasana. I often, in these online classes, invite you to really take whichever Shavasana feels good for you. Feel free to experiment, to explore, but really make it a priority to stay in your Shavasana. You can always reach out to us after class and ask questions or say how brilliant the class was. And you can just allow yourself to stay in Shavasana even after I stop talking. When you feel that you are wanting to complete your practice, then you roll to your side and slowly push yourself up into a seated position. Maybe you remain seated. Maybe you go straight into a meditation or simply a reflection, sitting to think about your top priorities. When you feel that your practice is coming to its end, bring your hands together in front of your heart, giving yourself a little smile, thanking yourself for making the priority to step on your mat. Namaste.